Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're looking at the absolutely magnificent Castillo de San Marcos down in St. Augustine, Florida. You know, when you see this gorgeous, unconquered stone monument standing so proudly today, it's super easy to think it was just dropped there, right? Like it was fully formed on day one to protect the Spanish Empire. But the actual truth, it's wild. The truth is a century of absolute chaos, trial, and error. Today, we're going to uncover the completely turbulent 100 years before a single stone of that famous fortress was ever even laid.
I mean, did you know the oldest masonry fort in the continental U.S. actually had 9, yes, literally 9 wooden predecessors? It's crazy to think about. The Castillo we know today wasn't the first, second, or even the 8th attempt to protect St. Augustine. It completely shatters this illusion that the stone structure was there from the get-go. Instead, what we're really looking at is the sheer, stubborn persistence required by the early Spanish settlers just to survive. Let's actually trace it back to where the whole shebang began.
So the story kicks off in the desperate, incredibly muddy late summer of 1565. And according to eyewitness accounts from the time, the very first fort wasn't a military citadel at all, not even close. The local Timucua Indians actually gave the newly landed Spaniards a very large house of a cacique, which is a local chief. Fearing an imminent attack from the French over at nearby Fort Caroline, the Spanish commanders just panicked and hastily ordered a ditch and moat dug right around this house. They basically just threw up a rampart of earth and wood as fast as humanly possible to protect their supplies and their soldiers.
And this brilliantly illustrates what that first encampment actually looked like. Look at the shocking contrast here. You've got this humble, completely organic structure made of palm and wood, and it's just miles away from the towering stone monument we picture when we hear the word Spanish fort today. This was purely a makeshift shelter. It was survival mode, plain and simple. And as you might guess, this temporary alliance with the land, well, it definitely wouldn't last.
Yeah, that temporary setup washed away pretty quickly. Tensions with the Native Americans started to get really strained, so the Spanish frantically relocated their forces over to Anastasia Island. They wanted to put Matanzas Bay right between them and the locals. And get this, they built a second, triangular fort there in just 10 days of frantic, non-stop work. But, nature had entirely different plans. This brand new structure lasted a mere 3 months before the relentless ocean simply washed away the very land it stood on. Talk about frustrating.
What followed was just a completely chaotic middle era. The Spanish soldiers were often totally unpaid, starving, and constantly battling the harsh weather, severe rot, and honestly, even each other. Take the third fort, built in 1566. It was literally destroyed by a mutiny of those same starving soldiers in 1572. So, what do? They built a fourth. Then a fifth in 1579, which deteriorated so badly it was constantly threatening to just crumble into dust. Then came the sixth in 1586. They barely even had the moat finished on that one before the infamous English privateer Sir Francis Drake showed up and literally burned it to the ground. It was just this unrelenting, exhausting cycle of build and destroy.
Now, what's really interesting about this next chapter is that we finally see a name we actually recognize today. The seventh structure, which they started in July of 1586, was the very first to actually bear the name San Marcos. But as you can probably guess by now, the name alone couldn't save it from Florida's insanely harsh, humid environment. Within just 3 years of being built, it was officially reported as being completely rotted out and threatening to collapse entirely.
The dramatic reality of the 1600s somehow only escalated from there. I mean, the 8th and 9th wooden forts spent decades quite literally falling apart. The 8th fort, which went up in 1604, managed to last 50 years, but it was chronically characterized as just dropping to pieces, despite frequent repairs. Imagine that for a second. Imagine serving guard duty in a fort that is basically being held together by dozens of wooden braces, all while you're desperately trying to fend off English pirate attacks. Which, amazingly, they successfully did in 1668 with the 9th fort. But man, by then, they absolutely knew enough was enough.
So the crucial point is right here, 23. In 1672, after over a century of dealing with 9 separate wooden failures, the Spanish militia made a massive, fundamental shift in their strategy. They finally began constructing the 10th fort, the stone Castillo de San Marcos we know today. But doing it right meant taking an agonizing 23 years to complete. No more 10-day rush jobs, no more thatched roofs blowing away in the wind. They were finally truly building for permanence.
And the absolute secret to that permanence? Coquina.
If you aren't familiar with it, Coquina is this incredibly unique, locally sourced stone-like compound. It's basically made of compressed shells and limestone, and it was a literal miracle building material for St. Augustine. It finally, once and for all, ended a century of rotting wood and endless termite damage. But here's the best part. Instead of shattering under heavy cannon fire like normal stone, Coquina's porous, sponge-like nature actually absorbed enemy attacks. Cannonballs would just kind of thud into it. It made the new fortress nearly indestructible.
The difference in the strategy and the outcome here is just staggering. On one side of the coin, you have the desperate, fleeting nature of the first 9 wooden forts, just constantly rotting in the humidity, washing out into the sea, burning to the ground, or falling victim to mutiny. But then, on the other side, you have the Coquina fortress. Sure, it required immense patience, taking decades and decades to actually construct, but the result was a permanent, unconquered legacy that has lasted for more than 3 centuries.
And that really brings us to the ultimate success of the Castillo. It's been said that because it is still standing tall after more than 300 years, obviously the fort has done its job. The 10th attempt really was the charm here. Because the Spanish utterly refused to give up through 100 years of grueling failures, this stronger fortress was never taken in battle. It protected St. Augustine perfectly, allowing the city to survive, grow, and thrive right into the present day.
Which kind of leaves us with this final thought. When you look at an incredible success, whether it's an impenetrable stone fortress or even a major personal achievement, you are rarely ever seeing the whole story. You're seeing the Castillo. You're not seeing the 9 rotting, burned, and washed away wooden forts that had to pave the way. So ask yourself, what monuments in your own life are built on a foundation of unseen failures? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep exploring the hidden histories all around you.